Hi everyone, I'm Erin Pierce and my case study is on the Neal National Wild Refuge in Iowa. My three questions to think about are first, to explain why such an active approach to restoration is important for tallgrass prairie. Second, what role does genetics management play in sustaining bison populations? And in what ways does this restoration project benefit the community? The Neal Wildlife Refuge is in Prairie City, Iowa, which was described as a region characterized by steeply rolling hills and well-developed drainage. Tallgrass prairie once covered 30 million acres of Iowa, but things started to change in 1846 when the land was settled by Euro-Americans. The prairie land was ideal for agriculture, so settlers developed the prairie into crop and pasture lands until eventually less than 0.1% of the original prairie remains. The refuge was established in 1991 in response to this huge amount of habitat loss. This is a map of Iowa in the 1830s to 1850s, and as you can see, there's a whole bunch of yellow, which is prairie. And this next map is from 2009, and it shows such a dramatic shift from prairie land to just corn and soybeans. So this really shows the actual devastation that the settlers caused just by changing the landscape completely. So here's a map of the refuge itself, and it shows in blue that it takes up a pretty good amount of Jasper County in Iowa. And these are the four major grasses that are native and dominated the prairie. There's big blue stem, switchgrass, Indian grass, and little blue stem. Grasses aren't all that grows, but they definitely dominate the natural landscape. Aside from crops like corn and soybeans being put on the land, there are also invasive species like the reed canary grass that has just completely taken over some of what's left of the prairie remnants, which is making it really difficult for restoration projects. So the goal of the refuge is to develop an ecosystem-based approach to restoration that views prairie and savanna restoration within the context of the entire landscape. And to get this wide context, the restoration goals are split into three focuses: habitat, wildlife, and people. For habitat, the goal is to protect, restore, reconstruct, and manage diverse native communities of tallgrass prairie, oak savanna, sedge meadow, and aquatic ecosystems. And the goals for wildlife are pretty similar. They're to protect, restore, and maintain biologically diverse populations of native wildlife. And then for people, they want the refuge to provide a variety of wildlife-dependent recreational and educational opportunities for visitors, and to treasure the native tallgrass prairie heritage, ecological processes, and cultural resources. So with these goals in mind, they made efforts in each category. For habitat, they started by getting rid of unwanted species and replanting the areas with native seeds and seedlings. And then for the next 2 years, they focused to work on keeping competing species out of the field while it's so young. And they also used prescribed fire to help them with the health of the fields as well, which I'll get into more later on. Restoration efforts specific to wildlife really went along with the success of the habitat restoration. And with that, several grassland birds have returned. They've also introduced herds of bison and elk into an enclosed area of the refuge. Regal fritillary butterflies were reintroduced, and they planned to reintroduce prairie chickens, but I couldn't find any information, so I don't think they've completed that part quite yet. The refuge has also accomplished quite a bit for people. They have a visitor center that provides a lot of educational exhibits. They offer teacher training workshops, ranger-led environmental education programs. They have science kiosks, brochures along the trails that you can learn more while you're taking a hike. They have spotting scopes so that you can see the bison and the elk, and they also provide an auto tour so you can drive through and see everything. They allow photography and they also allow hunting for deer, squirrel, rabbit, pheasant, quail. And then another important thing is the Friends of the Neal Smith Wildlife Refuge, and they are a group of supporters from the community and they volunteer for the projects and help spread the word. Prescribed fire has been really important in the success of the refuge. I pictured some of the tools used for reference. In spring of 2015, 2,163 acres of tallgrass prairie and oak savanna were burned at the refuge. Burning the dead vegetation off the surface is really beneficial in returning nutrients to the soil, promoting new growth. It enhances species diversity, improves the habitat, controls invasive plants, prevents the encroachment of unwanted woody vegetation, and also reduces the hazard of wildfire. The bison enclosure has been a highlight of the refuge, and it brings in a lot of visitors. So it's 700 acres with a herd of around 70 to 90 bison usually. A main concern was inbreeding of the bison since there's only room for one herd. So the refuge has partnered with 7 other herds from different refuges to manage the genetics of the herd. So this refuge has been really successful. In 2017, there were 285,000 recreational visits, which brought in $2.6 million to the local economy from local residents and $1.6 million from non-residents. This recreational spending has contributed to 34 jobs just in 2017. $1,363.2 thousand in employment income. It's also benefited total tax revenue and economic output. So for my critique, I first looked at number 4. The physical environment of the restored ecosystem is capable of sustaining reproducing populations of the species necessary for its continued stability or development along the desired trajectory. I picked this one mostly because of the bison populations and elk, of course, but the refuge has done a really good job of not only just reintroducing bison and elk to the area, but also focusing a lot on the sustainability of those herds and making sure the herds stay healthy long term. I also looked at number 5. The restored ecosystem apparently functions normally for its ecological stage of development and signs of dysfunction are absent. I picked this one because of how much work they put into not just replant things, but they're also working a lot to keep other species out, and they're constantly fighting back and making sure that they can grow these new fields even while they're so young and vulnerable. And the third one, I picked number 7, which is potential threats to the health and integrity of the restored ecosystem from the surrounding landscape have been eliminated or reduced as much as possible. And this is just because everything, all the prairie was pretty much gone, and they've done a really good job at maintaining the remnants that are left from the prairie, as well as replanting and keeping those crops out and grazing fields out and just really trying to get it back to what it was originally. And these are my resources. And that owl is a bird that was that came back. No. Ah. Ugh.